There we go. And so good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are. This is SIG API Machinery bi-weekly meeting for Kubernetes open source. My name is Federico Bongiovanni. Today is May 31st, 2023, and we have a packed meeting with a lot of interesting topics. So I guess, Cici, did you add those dates at the beginning? Did you want to cover that?
Oh, it's not me to add it. I'm not sure
Okay.
if the author want to update, or I can do it as well.
I mean, it's fine. It's very informational. So remember, production readiness reviews freeze. It's next, like in 8 days, 10 days. The cap freeze is in 2 weeks, and the code freeze is going to be almost in 6 weeks. So keep these dates in mind as you plan. Especially, I think, you know, the cap work is going high now, so we need to settle it down before the deadline comes. Very good. Thank you for whoever added that. Let's go to the next topic. So I don't know who wants to pick it up, Joe, David.
I guess I'll go ahead and introduce here. So a couple different groups apparently simultaneously thought about how nice life would be if we had some sort of compatibility checker or schema validation checker related to CRDs. And I think there are many possible things such a tool could do. I've included a link to one of them. It's one from OpenShift. I'm here in part soliciting for everybody else's link. If you have a tool that lints CRD manifests, that lints them or validates them for compatibility, whether you run it in CI, whether you run it as an admission plugin, trying to gather what the state of the world is. The project that I linked has both an admission plugin and a CLI component, and is sort of an exploratory effort. What would we want from such a tool? What sorts of rules would we want to enforce? How would we build rule sets? How would we handle exceptions? And what we would do for different types of CRDs, ones that you author, ones that you consume but don't author, and how you would handle different cases. And James, also listed here, came up with, was asking about something at about the same time, and Joe, I think, had an old tool or a couple ideas. So you guys have anything else you want to add?
No, I'm just really glad to see that there is a place that we can contribute on this, because it's come up a couple times. And I'm guessing, based on people I talked to and the number of times it comes up in conversation, there are probably other people that have been wishing this existed. And it seems pretty buildable, and having a framework where we can go in and start to add rules is like a really good starting point. So I plan to contribute to this. I think this is something that we all need. And I like the approach of starting at like in the ecosystem and letting people experiment and try things out. I'm curious if people would think like a long term, like say we built one that was working really good, would we eventually ever put it in Kube or not? I don't know, maybe it's too early to ask that, but I kind of like want to get something that's really good.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be interested in, I don't know if I'd put it in Kube proper, but a SIG project, I could imagine building a SIG project for it. Once we are able to write a solid cap that's based on experience that says these are the things that we have that seem to be working, here's how we will handle exceptions, here's how we will handle and recommend people use it to build rule sets. That's where I'd like to see it go. James, your hand went up and then went back down.
It was actually a thumbs up to agree with what was being said, but I just want to kind of like echo all of this really. We've built similar processes and tools for doing exactly this, and I'd love to actually collaborate and work on this together. And I think it'd be great to do. I wonder on like the SIG project thing, if this is something that we can iterate on within a Kubernetes SIGs repo still, or if it's something that we do want to develop externally and then move over in a more complete form. Because I do see other, alpha quality or experimental quality SIG projects. So just wondering if we can do that and then like collaborate together to put together that kit and everything else.
I think I'd like to try to build a KEP first. In part because I think once we publish it, it will end up being leveraged. And if we don't have some of the answers right, and sorry, I had not looked at your PR before. My apologies.
Yeah, so this is a very we've ended up just kind of building and extending this ourselves separately because for similar reasons, we need to put together an actual KEP on what it is and so on. And I think you've raised some good points around, what's a violation, what's a warning, how you treat those too. So
yeah, and the exceptions cases, how those get handled, I think we need to get that right to start with, and knowing what works or what doesn't work. I wouldn't want to create an alpha level project and then give people whiplash where it's, oh, now we have a new way to create exceptions, or now we have a new way to specify a rule set. Getting those basics in place so that then you have something that you could upgrade over time, I think is important for us to get right. But versus say getting every rule, we know new rules are going to come, so we don't have to get every rule, but we do need to have everything in place for, how do you define the rule? How do you select the rule? Is a rule on by default? Is there a way to say this rule is a warning for me, even if it's an error for everybody else? Those sorts of questions.
Yeah, definitely. I think the way we've done that previously is quite rudimentary with a very large, what ends up being a very large exceptions file. I think some of your ideas around possibly annotating the OpenAPI schemas or something along those lines is certainly better. I think it's lots to discuss on it. So yeah, I'd definitely like to work with you to put together that KEP.
Cool. Sean, you've got some comments.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that there's, for the SIG CLI, we've just created a brand new repo, and I'm trying to find the link to the repo where this particular proposal was accepted. It's not just CRD validation, it's basically entire object validation using the OpenAPI schema, and it's a separate tool. And it's the repo has already, or it's just recently within the last couple of weeks, been created.
And this is a tool for validating the actual CRs, not two different CRD manifests or schemas. I think that's correct. Okay. Question about what it can do, just because I'm now curious. One of the problems that I faced as I was developing this tool, at least the initial versions, was there are some CRDs that we effectively consume that we don't control the schemas for. And when those change in potentially incompatible ways, we don't get to just say no, because the schema evolved. And it would be really cool to be able to have a way to say, this schema change is being proposed. I know that it is potentially breaking. Can you run these updated rules against all of the data in my cluster without actually applying those rules? Is that a thing that your tool does?
I believe it would. It's based on the OpenAPI, and so as long as we'd be able to incorporate that new schema into the OpenAPI, then I think it would just work. So I feel slightly uncomfortable giving these answers because, to be honest, I'm not nearly as involved as Alex Zielinski and Antoine in this, and they would have better answers for you. And once I get the link to the repo, I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about it too. I think it is the building block that you could use if you wanted to write a controller that would do something like check if all the CRDs conform to a new schema update. You would still have to write the controller and figure out how you wanted to frame all that. But it is the building block. It is a way to do, like, outside of the API server, is this CRD valid according to a CRD?
Yeah, I've just been putting in the chat. We have a similar process to that, where we actually do have some tooling that goes and fetches every instance of every object of a particular, CRD from every cluster, runs all of that through validation as defined by like a CRD file provided on disk, open API schema, validation, pruning and stuff to actually tell us whether it's safe to roll out a change. So that's part of some like automated flows that allow us to make sure we're not about to go and invalidate existing objects and to pinpoint who to reach out to. So something that satisfies that use case too, I think if we can incorporate that here, would be great.
That would be, it's an idea that I'm definitely interested in. It was in one of my, I wonder if we should do this. Can you link to that tool from the agenda?
Yeah, it's not currently in a repo or somewhere public at the minute, but yes, I can.
Okay.
Let me have a think about where and how. Maybe I'll open PR.
That'd be really cool. Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty simple. I'm basically importing like kates.io/API server, running the pruning function and returning whether or not anything was pruned, because that's obviously an invalid field, and then running it through actual just like open API schema validation too. So it's all client side. You haven't got any kind of server side webhook stuff going on for defaulting, but yeah. It's pretty basic. I think it's mostly leaning on all of our internal machinery already, like the API server stuff.
And then loosely related to all this, Alex has also been working on a KEP to make it so that we get what's called ratcheting in CRDs, which basically means that if you update a CR and you don't change one of the fields, you can write that CRD even if that field no longer matches the validation rules, maybe because the CRD changed. So that is kind of like another slightly related aspect to this, where even if you do break your validation, if a writer shouldn't be impacted by that because they're not changing that part of an object, they can still continue to function.
There was a question in chat. Oh yeah, it was replied. A question from Antoine and James already replied. Okay. So, what are the next steps here?
I think what I'd like to do is get a few people to try this. I've reached out to someone from IBM to give it a go. I think, and then help try to figure out some of the bigger gaps that we can try a couple solutions. In particular, the exception mechanism is one that stands out, and so is the validation rule selection to sort of set policy. Which roles do what can you control on a manifest and what can't you? And then after that, try to write up a KEP where we can all agree on these are the boundaries. Here's how we're going to solve some of these core concepts as a precursor to creating a repo to be able to actually publish the first iteration of a tool that we hope we'd be able to evolve without breaking people. And I think my goal was to satisfy at least the four people or so that I know are interested now, and that would be me, James, and Peter, and if anyone else is interested, and Stefan. and Joe. Because we all have different rule sets and we're all going to want to handle these things slightly differently. But I think if we are careful about building a tool, we can all have a shared tool to do this.
Question, is the intention of this crd-schema-checker to define policies and best practices, or things that might be able to go inside of an open API schema?
So I think the way that I would like to use it is to do both structural flagging of you've done this and it's just going to break. If you've removed a field, you've changed the type of a field, something like that. And I would like to use it to enforce best practices, like don't use a bool. And that's part of what I know is going to be a case of, well, we need to have different rule sets because not everyone agrees on what the best practices are. And we need to make it possible for people to add them. If somebody wants to add a policy in their own build of this somewhere.
Yeah, I'm just thinking how much overlap there is between this and the kubectl validate tool, because I'm thinking the feature that tool has, which lets you supply like an overlay patch for like a CRD schema or something, plus the fact that it can validate cell expressions, means that a lot of policy and best practices can be encoded on a case-by-case basis with that tool. So I'm wondering if that's a consideration here as an alternative, or
can you link to the tool? Like really, there's also the trying to find these different things.
Yeah,
I am
absolutely.
very interested in developing a tool that will, the primary purpose of the tool be to help people write APIs, which means that it would be working against manifests, not against CRD manifests, not against CR instances. The CR instance validation, at least to my mind, is sort of a secondary thing. It's a case of, yep, I know this thing has been flagged as this is dangerous, and now I'm going to check. So kubectl validate sounds like it's doing that case of this has already been flagged. Now let me go check my actual instances. But a link to the tool in here would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also another feature we're planning that it isn't there yet would be to validate updates, not just like creates of resources, which would also might help your case of like don't change this field, things like that.
Yeah. I've dropped a spot for you to add the link. It'd be real helpful for us to have it.
Okay, anything else on this topic? Looks good. Very good. Well, thank you, everybody. Let's move to next one. And Marek, who has been patiently waiting for his turn. Hi, Marek. Do you want to take it over? I see 3 things from you here.
Yeah, sure. I hope that no one minds. I just, there were many things that on my mind, so I decided just to come in and talk about them. So first thing, I'm not saying totally that this is like about the timeline, including 128, but I would want to start to revive the CAP 2340 and understand what are the blockers, so we can move it to from provisional to the next status, which is implementable, if I remember correctly. So this is 2020, 2019 to 2020 CAP, so there is a lot of legacy, but the problem described here still exists and it's current, and it also affects all other work in API server currently happening, like watch list CAP. So I would like to discuss it. I don't know full context, but for me, I think I would identify 2 potential blockers or things that we need to figure out. One is this cap requires Kubernetes to handle resource type with rare changes. We need a way to guarantee that watch event will get a watch notification or watch event even if the resource is not updated like for a long time. So this was original, like this can be solved by bookmarks that are, I think, now used currently. Back then it was not even an frequent like or known solution, like it was still developed solution, but we now use bookmarks. The thing that we are missing is how to enforce some limits on latency. And there are two ways to do that, either by requiring all Kubernetes administrators to configure their etcd to have 200 milli or like some low number of, for example, 250 milliseconds of periodic watch notifications, which is a push-based from etcd server notification that an object or a watch didn't get an event for last period. So let's send a bookmark or watch progress notification, as it is called. And the second solution is for a client to request it by themselves. The problem that we hear is that requesting by itself requires it was introduced as a feature to 3.4 etcd release. Back then it was a new release. Now I think it's pretty old, like 8 years old. It's and previous releases are no longer supported. So I don't know what's the best solution, but I wanted to pick up is I wanted to identify the blocker and ask what is your opinion. Should we either depend on etcd configuration or etcd version and how to best handle? That's one thing. Second thing to quickly go through is correctness testing. Back then there was no way to test correctness of this approach. In theory we know it should be correct, but in practice you never know. Now etcd has machinery to confirm that that I think we discussed in previous meeting. So that's all. This is all I have on this topic, and I'd like to understand: what community see? What blockers do you see that we need to solve to get this cap implemented, at least as an alpha?
So fair disclosure, I wrote the original KEP, so I did try and get the etcd work started, and I'm really excited to see Marek picking this up and trying to move it forward. I do agree. I think the situation is a little easier now that the work in etcd has had a significant amount of bake time. So I think that's really helpful. I think this is still very important. I remember after we had worked in etcd, bookmarks were added using kind of a derivative of this idea, and then the watch list feature is being added now, which is a derivative of this idea. But this still makes the core list operation a lot better. So I'm supportive of getting that one fully fixed.
And I just want to make sure I'm remembering this problem correctly. It's been a while.
Yeah, so the problem stems from the way that we misuse resource version. So right now, when a node asks for all its pods, it still says RV equals 0. Give me whatever you've got. I don't care how stale it is. But the reality is that causes a known correctness problem. And when we tried to fix that, we got our changes reverted because it damaged scalability too much, because the lists ended up going to etcd, and that was slow. So what this does is it allows you to get that same behavior of doing a consistent list that's guaranteed not to be arbitrarily stale, but you can read it from the watch cache and get the same scalability properties.
Okay.
So basically the trick is, instead of asking etcd for the whole list, you ask etcd what is the latest revision, and as long as your watch cache can serve that, you serve from that. And if it's not, the expectation is they can catch up really quick and you can detect that.
I think I saw a prototype PR for this. Is this the prototype PR where if the watch cache realized I'm not up to date, it would wait for like 2 seconds, and then I don't remember whether it fell through and did a live get, or if
Yeah, that's exactly it. This is that.
Okay. Okay, I think I remember that. I remember the problem it was trying to solve.
Yeah. And this all stemmed from Clayton's like 2017, we violate fundamental guarantees issue, which is still outstanding.
Okay. And is this design shifting that original prototype PR that much, or is it still, if I get a request to list from the watch cache, I'm going to try to list, I'm going to wait, I'm going to return, and the kubelet will just try again later.
So the difference that my current proposal is to pick alternative, back then rejected approach of not wait. I mean, back then we waited for a revision, but the wait was based on fact that we depended on etcd sending an update at least every 250 milliseconds. And the change I proposed was the alternative where Kubernetes just requests a progress notification to get immediately progress notification.
Yeah, so you're not really pulling anymore. You're just saying, like, if what I have in the cache isn't up to date, tell etcd I need a notification. The expected, P99 latency, that is a millisecond or two, and then you can reserve your read.
Yeah, give me bookmark where where the watch is, where is the revision at the point. Haven't you send me is the events missing because the watch is like stuck, or I am already there, I have the latest data, but I didn't just see the revision because nothing happened for a couple of seconds.
I think I'm still conceptually fine with this. I think I was conceptually fine with it before. Don't know that I would have time to review code for it though.
I could review the code, and I'm pretty sure we could find a second person besides me because I might be a little biased. Yeah, and I think we're going to be able to get the latency way down on this with Marek's proposal.
I'm happy to do a first pass PR review on these things, if you need it.
Great. So I have two questions. Joe, you mentioned you had some PR, or this David, you've seen some PR. I started prototyping it myself, but would be great to not.
Yeah, let me pull that up and see what I have. I think I have something. And then did we get an answer on the question of, can we assume that Kubernetes is using etcd 3.4 or newer? Because we're going to be relying on functionality that was introduced at that point. Or do we need to flag the API server?
I think I would make it check and fail if it's not at that level. And by fail, I mean if the argument is set to use this mechanism.
Like on startup, we could just check the version with the client, and if it's not new enough, we could just fail.
But I'm not prepared to say we should go ahead and break everyone.
So yeah, so maybe question here. The problem is that client doesn't have functionality to check version. There is a separate API or REST API, which is not great and not really standardized. That gives you more accurate version. My proposal would be, this is a separate, I don't want to solve etcd versioning for clients now. If possible, what I would suggest is, this is a separate call. it's guaranteed to be either successful or fail. Like if etcd doesn't handle this method, it will fail, and client can just, on Bootstrap, we can test if this feature is supported by just requesting the notification, and if it fails, we fall back.
Yeah, I was about to suggest the exact same thing, which is you can deterministically inspect if etcd has this feature. So just do that at startup, and like you know exactly what error you should get, and then you can just like if somebody sets the flag and you make that call at startup and it doesn't work. Is there any problems with assuming etcd is running at startup?
It doesn't have to be started until the readiness check succeeds. So
Okay.
There is a sort of a grace built in. You wouldn't want to fail early, but
Yeah, so we just got to
conceptually,
get
I think
that
you can make it do
ordered right. Okay.
Yeah, we specifically took it out of the live disk track because we didn't want it starting the API server.
Yeah. So in the review, we just got to be really careful about that. Like we got to be careful when we do this check and how we fail.
Okay, so with everything agreeing, I don't know. I don't know if I can push like people or request to get it through the 128, but yeah, I will try to have something like next week. Okay. Because we still need PRR because there was no PRR back then.
Yeah, we're gonna have to build a list and start adding. Joe and I'll have to start adding everything to the milestone, and we'll just have to see how much fits.
Yeah. This is great though. I'm excited.
Very good. What about the next items?
Give me a second.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. So, and yeah, you might think that the first one was a big one, but I think the second is bigger doozy. So my problem is restoring etcd from backups, and fact that when I'm working still on etcd contract, there is not codified property that can put people, like trap people in, or can lead to incorrect behavior if people don't know it. And it's I don't know if I talked with a couple of people and they have not everyone has a workaround. So to get it quick, since I think Kubernetes 125, etcd restore operation broke because there is no longer a behavior that API server will notice and notice that revision went down. So this usually should never happen, but it is expected, at least in etcd, when you restore from backup, because there is no functionality officially supported by etcd to increase revision during backup and have a behavior that is, let's say, understandable by clients. Like there is no way for etcd to provide this information. So, and this is basically cache invalidation problem, which of course is hard. What I would want to propose, and get your thoughts about this, is having an official, or proposing an official support for restore, or having an effort to add an official support by providing by making this behavior explicit, tested, and providing the necessary tooling on etcd side that would allow Kubernetes cluster to be restored. Based I'm not 100% sure. I did some POC. It sometimes worked, it sometimes didn't. But based on my experience, there are two things that etcd needs to do. After restore, increase the revision so high that there is no chance that that restore will go back, or after the restore will go back in revision, which basically you take maximum QPS, multiply it through, I know, time of your backup. So 1000 QPS times, I know, 2 weeks in seconds, and you get, and you add it to revision, and it still fits in int 33, which is the max revision value. And you also mark everything as compacted, which basically means that every request from clients will get response, this revision was compacted, please get the latest data. So, but this will mean that the clients will basically need to refetch the state. So those two, so from Kubernetes standpoint, we just need to make it like document, test it, and make it official that revision never goes down. And I would put a feature request for etcd to add, because basically what we need is etcd restore tool to have an option to override revision, and that's all. We just need a feature request. And at least from my perspective, I would be willing as an etcd maintainer to accept this kind of feature because it's limited to a tool and it doesn't influence any functionality, and it provides a thing that should already be there. If not, it could be, we could have it like even separate. It doesn't matter if it's tool or if it's backported. It would be just easier for people to consume. That's my idea. If you have any thoughts, I'm happy to hear.
I'd be really happy to see this one. This is one that Daniel had spoken about as a good practice for restore. I don't know if he ever actually built it. But yeah, I'd be very happy to see this if etcd would take the change. I can't like pre-volunteer etcd to take it. But if you can pre-volunteer etcd to take it, then that would be awesome. Yeah,
we just revive Joe as and Wenja, and we push it. Yeah, I mean, yes, I think we can, like, we have precedence for, we have precedence for backporting limited features that for core functionality. For example, yeah, the problems with correctness, we backported a feature to improve correctness checking because like there was no way we could leave people hanging. And this is for me living, like this is, if I would ask, will users more suffer from not backporting it? And for me, answer is yes. Like everyone suffers, but no one talks about this. Like,
I'm also really supportive of this. I saw just like a week and a half ago, I was on an issue where somebody was trying to figure out how to bump their etcd revision to restore a backup. And like they were talking about going and mucking in etcd files. It's like, no, just write a bunch of no-op updates. Like don't mess with the files. That's just gonna make things worse. But yeah, it's kind of scary that we don't really have even any guidance on it. And
yep.
In addition to like the guidance on what to do and how to do it, I also think we do need to be responsible in stating that like going back in time on your control plane state can have severe consequences on your cluster. Like if it's fairly recent, your cluster hasn't been super active, there are situations where it's probably fine, but there is external state in your nodes, there's external state in a variety of different places. And I would love to have a place to document the risks of going back in time in your control plane too.
Okay. Any other feedback? So my question would be, what is the best way to go around it? Do we need, if this is an officially supported feature, technically there is outside of documentation no work for like for Kubernetes side. It's more about documentation. It's more about testing. But for me, it still sounds as a technically a cap. But
I would like to see the feature in etcd before updating the Kubernetes documentation. That way the documentation can be updated with, this is how you should do this. This is the supported way to do this on the storage that we support. And this is the guarantee that the QAPI server now provides as a result of doing restore in this manner. I wouldn't want to say, this is a guarantee the API server should have, and we just fail at it until etcd gets the update.
Yeah, and I don't know if we need a cap if we're literally only changing etcd and then documenting a process. I don't know. Does anybody have thoughts on that?
I don't see a need for a cap.
Yeah,
Not for us. I don't know what etcd will require for the change.
okay, so if there is no need to pre-plan this feature, because like cap would require a pre-plan, we just need basically first, I just need to build a POC to prove that it works and define what is needed on etcd side. And I would just merge it as a test propose it as a test. And when we have tests and we have a scenario working, we can start documenting it, or thinking how to organize a documentation. Does it sound reasonable?
Yeah, sounds great. Yeah, thanks for doing this, by the way. This is, the community really does need this. It's asking, the only other way I know of is you have to restart all your control plane components.
And yeah, nodes are great with that. Kubelets.
Oh, all the kubelets too. Oh man, yeah.
Okay, last topic. Hopefully it will go as well. So part of my work is the next step from defining the contract. And this step basically is understanding etcd performance behaviors and etcd basically define etcd SLO. So we can not only understand that Kubernetes is behaving correctly because its SLO are within reason or expectation, doing the same thing for etcd to make sure that etcd will never break it. This is dependent, etcd should be in some way independent, or make the step and be independent and find those issues faster than waiting for Kubernetes to run scalability tests. And part of this defining its limits is defining the storage limit for etcd. There is known quota that is global quota for all your full etcd cluster. But the problem is, based on Kubernetes behavior, there are limits there are even bigger limits, not on size of full cluster, but on size of each resource. And the problem is there is no way to track it reasonably in etcd. And it would require unreasonable amount of effort to make it trackable. And make it customizable from, Han?
Yeah, it would be possible using buckets. We've talked about this.
Yeah. It would be unreasonably complicated to implement it. It's possible, yes.
Buckets have statistics, and if we put each resource type in its own bucket, then we can just query bucket statistics to get the size.
but it's it's storage layer. Like to clarify, this is storage layer for etcd, so bbold feature, not an etcd API, and there is no. It's not propagated through in any way, and it would require huge effort to do that. So what I would want to discuss and propose is introducing a metric similar to existing metric, but better, that is not focused on, like currently the metric that storage DB total size is for endpoint, which is totally unrelated to what really Kubernetes uses and limits, and make it usable and have it be it a proper signal. And to do that would require, or one way to do that would be exposing a metric by that calculates size of each resource based on data stored in watch cache. So it means data is not the freshest, at least per some definition of like fresh that watch cache has, but it would be accurate enough to see, are you hitting the limit? Are you close to hitting the limit or not close to the limit? And should you expect your cluster to die soon? So examples that I've seen in many cases and production clusters is people dumping policy, like I know policy reports. I don't know what it is. It's apparently big enough to take down API server because it can grow over 2 gigabytes, and we have a hard limit. Also, API server has hard limit. API server will reject an etcd response that is over 2 gigabytes of size, and there is no way from client side to know what is the expectation about the size of the request. Yeah, I can talk about like in different ways. Oh, okay. I mean, this is the number I've seen. Maybe it's on older version. I don't know how it changed. Maybe it was customized in the cluster. But yeah. Okay, so what do you think about adding a metric based on for size of resource, all data within a resource type in Kube API server?
I'm still a little unsure why it wouldn't be in etcd. Like why we wouldn't say, why there wouldn't be a way to say, I want to know how much data is located underneath this key, underneath this space.
I can answer this one. etcd doesn't have the concept of resources. These are just keys.
Yeah.
So adding a bunch of like Kubernetes specific logic in order to like extract out resources would be very un-etcd.
It doesn't seem like it would be specific to resources. It seems like it would be underneath this key space, underneath this pattern. I mean, surely other consumers of etcd have had similar questions.
They don't actually. I mean, like the thing where we use slashes is a Kubernetes convention, and by no means does anyone else ever do that. It is just a key value store. Very simply.
I understand that, but I'm surprised that it would not be a common way to build it.
I think buckets are the way that people would tend to do stuff like this, to be honest. Because buckets give you the isolated names. You also get the bucket statistics. So you end up with exactly the things that you want. It's hard to do this upstream in API machinery because you basically need to do a full list. I mean, look, if we can do consistent lists from our watch cache, I think this metric makes sense because then we don't have to go to etcd to do a full list. We can just look in memory and then estimate the size.
Does kube state metrics already do this?
Size of the resource object. You get maybe you get size of the serialized objects, but that's also not necessarily the size that's in etcd.
I haven't followed, but I think they have number of objects, but I haven't seen size, but I'm really out of date with them.
We could definitely ask them to add it. That's not.
That size would be API version dependent as well, though, right? Like there's a lot of factors to it. It might be protobuf etcd.
Yep. Encoding. Yep. Serialization. Yep.
I'm wondering if it might be better to like experiment out of tree in a place like that to get what we need and see how far that gets us.
I mean, I just think it makes a lot more sense when you have consistent list from cache. Then it's like not really a performance hit. You're just doing stuff in memory every once in a while, right? Like,
yeah, the problem is passing the data. Like, calculate etcd will not calculate it, and having kube state metrics or whoever like calculate it by fetching it from etcd. That's the problem because you're making the request that is the costly request of fetching like gigabyte of data, and so
serializing is certainly not free, right? So serialization is why the watch or list via watch was being made, right? Because it consumes. So determining serialized size, even QAPI server side, is not a free thing.
One of the reasons I had written that Augur tool a long time ago is like a command line tool to inspect the etcd databases is like sometimes that like you wouldn't even be able to get the API server running and you wanted to know what objects in etcd were causing so many problems. So that makes me wonder about the layering a little bit too, right? Like if the problem is you've got something in etcd, it's not working and you can't even start the API server, maybe you need a tool that's lower level.
I don't think that this one is really clear in terms of like if you can't serialize the list, how would you do it API server side, huh? Like I know you'd have the data there, but you know, serializing multiple gigs is still heavy and trouble.
I mean, I think maybe if etcd exposed some sort of interface that allowed you to express a key range and then give you the size of that key range, that would be, and then we could invoke that thing the same way we invoke in a loop the count.
That
of
sounds
keys.
very practical to me. I can see that.
Yeah.
That sounds great.
okay. So the problem, I mean, this would be, let's say it's an optional option to list, just listing objects in some for a resource. Do we need, I mean, if it's a same range request, it would mean that if older version of etcd would that doesn't like until we introduce it in etcd, I mean it would be as a feature it more matches 3.6. So yeah, we will need to wait, but until that, like it would mean that Kubernetes will basically for each /metrics request, it would need to read full etcd data and copy it to its own memory. If I understood correctly.
Yeah, I guess that you're saying effectively this. You're saying something very similar to the why putting in the API server is a problem, right? It's going to be heavy for someone.
It might be a good thing to just experiment with and see like how much mileage you can get at different locations. I'm really interested to see if you actually get worse behavior up in a controller like crd-schema-checker than you do in the API server, because you already have to transport everything. And I'm also really interested if somebody could come up with something down at the etcd layer, because I have definitely been in the state where I couldn't get a cluster running, and I had to know what was going on in the actual data set. So I did personally build tools for that.
Yeah, I mean, definitely would be good to validate. Yeah, to compare performance and see how big the hit is.
Yeah.
We're almost at time.
Okay.
Marek, anything else you want to get from this forum before we run out of time?
No, I assume like the follow-up is like by default, it doesn't make sense. I mean, for watch cache is still could be problematic, so it would be good to get some POC and see what we get and compare the two approaches.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting capability. I'm just really interested in seeing other options be exhausted before we look into like putting stuff into the API server.
Okay, that's all I needed. Thanks everyone for listening for me for so long.
Thanks, Marek.
Yeah, thank you for coming and presenting all these good ideas. And I think we're at time. I want to thank everybody for participating today. And we'll see you next time. I will upload the recording soon and share as usual. Thank you. Stay safe.